We've done all the announcements. Megan Narvey is the, am I saying? Okay, second guess myself. Megan Narvey is the outreach conservator at the Minnesota Historical Society, which is a really big deal, where she provides guidance to individuals and local historical organizations on caring for collections, big and small, across the state of Minnesota. Before coming to MNHS, Megan worked as an objects conservator at the Western Archaeological Conservation Center in Tucson, Arizona, and the Objects Conservation Fellow at the Canadian Conservation Institute in Ottawa, Ontario. So she's been all around doing this work. Megan received a BA in chemistry from Carleton College and an MA in principles of conservation and an MSc in conservation for archaeology and museums from the University College London. So lots of travel in there. I hope you heard about that. So without further ado,
thank you. I'm looking forward to speaking with you all today about caring for your heirlooms, art, and personal collections, whatever that happens to be. I won't judge whatever it is. So the premise of my talk today is just like how to take care of the things that you value, whatever they are. I had a great introduction. Thank you.
Sure.
My name is Megan. I work for the Minnesota Historical Society, and my job is basically just to provide guidance and resources to people on taking care of their things. So whether it's a county historical society or whether it's a person, everybody needs a little bit of help because the long-term preservation and care of your stuff, of collections, is a really it can be, sometimes it's very obvious and sometimes it's a little bit more complex, the right things to do and the right precautions to take. I actually have 2 master's degrees in conservation. I studied for 3 years to get my degree in conservation, and then I've done lots of different internships and fellowships and stuff in order to get all of the knowledge that I have, but that doesn't mean that you can't take care of your own things yourself. You just need to have like the right baseline knowledge to get there. So that's what I'm going to give you today. I'm going to give you like the grounding knowledge to take care of your stuff yourself in your home. And I'm going to talk really fast in order to get you there because there's a lot of information I want to share with you. And that's why I gave everybody a handout, because I can be really overwhelming. Somebody called me once a fire hose of information. And so I don't want you to be scrambling or overwhelmed, trying to take notes or remember everything. So you have the handout, you can remember the things that you have seen. And if you're on Zoom and you want to get a copy of the handout, you can see my email address right there. You can also email me and I'll get you a copy. So yeah, here we go. These are the things I'm going to talk about today. Number 1, obviously, how to preserve and protect the things you value. Number 2, recommendations for how to find additional resources. I can give you your baseline, but you're obviously going to have more questions when I'm done. Then you might have more questions than answers when I'm done based on your specific circumstances. And then I'll have lots of time for questions and answers at the end, hopefully, because I think that those are the most fun. So we have this like kind of grounding philosophy in conservation for how things fall apart called the 10 agents of deterioration. It was created, I don't know how many years ago, a long time ago, by the Canadian Conservation Institute. And it's sort of like a philosophy for understanding deterioration mechanism. And if you think about the 10 agents of deterioration, you might be thinking like the 10 agents of deterioration, but unfortunately they're not that cool. They are these things, the 10 agents of deterioration. And some things might seem really obvious to you, like, yeah, duh, fire is great, like obviously things fall apart when they burn. And other things like dissociation, you're probably like, what? But I'm going to go through each of the 10 agents of deterioration and explain what they are so that you understand what it is and how you can protect against that thing causing your stuff to fall apart. So I'll start with the easy one. Physical forces. a pretty obvious, easy one to understand. It's basically any kind of damage that is caused by physical harm. It could be impact, vibration, pressure, rubbing, anything sort of physical. And the kind of damage it causes is dents, tears, cracks, chips, punctures, distortion, breaks, that kind of damage. And the sources of that kind of damage, it can be handling, gravity, put something on the ground, shipping damages when you send something in the mail and it arrives and it's broken. It can be from construction, and that can be even just as simple as the vibrations from something being constructed next door. And then it can be from like much bigger, less frequent events like earthquakes, vandalism, and disasters. So some of these things happen every single day. We might handle something all the time, and then some of these things happen very infrequently, but if it does happen, it's a huge disaster. So there's different ways to think about physical forces. How can you prevent damage from physical forces? So the most important way to prevent that kind of damage is to provide protection and support for fragile items when they're stored, handled, moved, and displayed. So it depends on the kind of material, how you can provide that kind of protection. But an important way to think about it is providing cushioning when you're handling things. So making sure that you're using like soft surfaces and like a stable, like putting things on a stable table, or if you're displaying something on a wall, making sure that the shelf is securely attached to the wall and not likely to fall off the wall by accident, like a kid runs next to it or something like that. I like to tell people to plan ahead before you're moving things. So this can be as simple as like you're moving a bowl from one room to the other, or like moving a piece of furniture. If you plan your move ahead before you move things, you're more likely to have cleared your path, opened doors. You're not likely to pick something up and not have a place to put it down again later on. You're more likely to not have to like hold something in one arm, or like just end up in an awkward situation. So when you're handling something that you value, make your whole move ahead of time, like clear up a spot for it to get set down later. Make sure that there's nothing in your way when you're carrying it somewhere. Make sure that all of the doors are open already, so you don't have to awkwardly open the door while you're carrying your thing, stuff like that. And of course, in this picture, it's nice to like be gentle when you're carrying things, and not overly aggressive. I feel like I've already talked too long about physical forces. Okay.
Not at all.
Okay. All right, moving on to fire. So fire damage can be caused by smoke, soot, heat damage, extinguishing methods, or of course it can be complete destruction, and that's not uncommon when it comes to a fire, is that things can be completely destroyed. The kind of damage that we see is charring, staining, melting, cracking, shattering, and water damage. Because of course, when we're extinguishing a fire, we use lots of water. The most common causes of house fires are cooking and faulty heating equipment. So that's a ping here to make sure that you're using safe methods to cook and heat your home. So what can you do to prevent fire damage to your things? The most important thing that you can do to prevent fire damage to your valuable items is to make sure that you've installed smoke detectors and fire extinguishers and fire blankets in all of the appropriate places to make sure that you're preventing fires from occurring in the first place, because fire damage is almost impossible to mitigate once it's happened. You basically just want the fire to not happen at all. So whatever you can do to prevent a fire from occurring, that's the best kind of situation you can find yourselves in. Prevent fire from happening. I want to really make extremely clear the official position from every kind of cultural heritage organization there is. The official position of me and the Minnesota Historical Society is that human life is more important than your valuables. There is no situation in which I would recommend that you prioritize an item over your life or anything else. Make sure that you are making sure that you are safe in a fire and do not go in to grab an item instead of getting out of the house if there's just want to make sure that everybody understands that is always more important. If you experience a fire and you have a lot of damaged items, I'm going to talk more about what you can do after an emergency situation to get help, because it can feel really overwhelming. But I just want to throw out one email, which is really helpful. There is a group of people called the National Heritage Responders who respond to emails about emergencies that have affected your valuables and belongings and things like that. And they're called the National Heritage Responders, and they have that public email address there. And they are extremely cool, and I'm also a National Heritage Responder. So water damage I put right after fire, because they go hand in hand, because water damage is part of fire damage, but water damage is also way more common than fire damage in Minnesota. Water damage can be caused by liquid water. This is especially common from leaks, floods, or condensation. And you might be thinking it can come from like a flood, like the Red River flooding or something like that. And it could come from a hole in your roof, but it can also come from a burst pipe. It can come from a condensation on your window pane. It can come from like a leaky faucet in like a weird place that you're not expecting. Water comes from all sorts of weird places. And it can really devastate your stuff. It's a huge problem for museums, for any kind of collection, for any kind of heirloom. Water can cause mold growth, physical damage, distortion, staining, the running of inks and dyes. It can cause tide lines, the hardening and shrinking of surfaces, like leather is especially susceptible to this. It will cause corrosion and rust, and it will cause the blanching of varnishes. And an example of this that I like to share is, when you put a wet cup down on a wood table and it leaves that like circle on the table, that's like the blanching of the varnish. That's what will happen. So what can you do to prevent water damage? This is something that I'm going to say approximately 500 times, and you're not going to like it. Avoid storing things in attics and basements in your home. Attics and basements are just places where water damage is the most likely to happen. Unfortunately, attics are very close to your roof, where leaks are most likely to happen, and basements are closest to the ground, where water is most likely to come up in a flood. Not only that, but those are the places in our house where we go the least often, and so we're less likely to find out immediately if water is in those spaces. If you're in your kitchen and there's like a leak from your kitchen sink or something, or there's a leak from your attic that's made it all the way to your living space in your house, you notice those problems right away and you can deal with them immediately. But if it's in your attic or your basement, sometimes you might not know for like a long time. And that can lead to mold growth, which takes like a couple days sometimes to set in. But once it's set in, it's a big health problem and a big condition issue for your things. Another way to prevent water damage is to perform regular building maintenance on your house. So make sure that you're cleaning your gutters and that sort of thing. Fixing your roof, make sure there's no holes. And I like to advise people to store and display your things in boxes, frames, and display cases to add a layer of protection. So I have dealt with people, advised people who have stored their things in boxes or not stored their things in boxes and regretted it. But what happens is if you have your stuff in a box and the box gets wet, you can take your things out of the box, and the things inside the box, if it hasn't been that long, they might still be completely dry. The box is wet, you can throw out the box. Who cares about the box? The stuff inside is still completely dry. You can basically just put them in a dry box and they're completely fine. If you don't have your stuff in a box and water falls on them, then your object is wet and you have to go through a whole process to dry out that object safely. And in one case, water got on the object, the ink bled all over this like historic paper document, and they are in this position where like there's basically nothing you can do to like make that ink go back to the way it was before it bled. So there's a lot to be said for like simple layers of protection like that, putting things in a frame, putting things in a box, instead of just having one out. And then I have the link here to the National Heritage Responders again, because they also will provide guidance and advice for water damage. All right, let's talk about pests. Really fun topic. Damage caused by insects, rodents, birds, bats, and microorganisms like mold. Pest damage is often physical damage. It can be staining, and it's health and safety concerns. So you might know that mold is bad to breathe in. Some molds are like really toxic, but all molds can be they cause sensitivity in people over time. And so the more mold you breathe in, the worse it is for your health. Another possible health and safety concern, like basically all excrement is a health and safety concern. When I was working in Arizona, we had this one project where we were working in this house that was like infested with mice, because nobody lived there anymore. It's just a historic home. And when we went to work in there, we had to wear full PPE, like Tyvek suits, respirators, goggles, gloves, and like treat it like a full like hazardous waste site, because the mice were in there, and in Arizona, hantavirus is like a really serious threat. So it was like a very intense environment to work in. So there's less hantavirus in Minnesota than in Arizona, but it's still good to be cautious of mice in your spaces. Sources of damage to your items can include nesting, use as a food source, laying eggs, gnawing, and excretions. So some like pests here, I have up here a webbing clothes moth. You might know clothes moths as a particular threat to our wool sweaters. And then also carpet beetles here, they also like our wool sweaters. But there are also types of bugs that like to eat paper documents. So if you have like boxes of like important papers or books that you store in the basement or something, that is a prime place where silverfish really like to come and get their fill. And I don't know about you, but this is the time of year where mice really also like to come into our nice warm houses and find things to make little warm nests from. What can we do about pests? Regular housekeeping is really like the top priority here. If you keep spaces clean and tidy, it makes them less inviting for pests, and it also helps you keep an eye out for pests so that you can know whether or not something looks like there's been an intruder there or not. It helps you monitor for them. There are other ways you can monitor for them. If you've had a problem in the past, there are different like pest traps and stuff that you can use in your house. Again, don't store items in basements or attics, because these are the places where we go the least often, and so they're the most likely for bugs and creepy crawlies to want to live. Plus, these are pests like to live in like damp environments, typically damp, humid places, and attics and basements tend to be those. They don't like low humidity and they don't like low temperature either. So if you have like a nice warm humid space, that is going to encourage more pest activity. I do have one tip here about what to do if you find clothes moths or other kinds of bugs in your stuff, and that is the number one way to kill bugs is to freeze them. So this is a way that will kill bugs and will basically not harm like most anything that you have that's like an item. Is if you put it in a bag, you can use like a big garbage bag or something, and stick it in a freezer, like a chest freezer should work. Leave it there for a couple weeks, and then take it out of the freezer, let it come to room temperature. For most places in the world, that is enough to kill a bug. For Minnesota, because we have really hardy bugs, I recommend putting it back in the freezer really quick, like the next day after it's come to room temperature, so that you shock any bugs that survived that attempt, and they will come out of hibernation and be like, I survived, and then you freeze them again, and that should be enough to kill them. So that is my advice for if you. All right, light damage. Light damage is caused by both visible and UV light. It comes from the sun, it comes from light bulbs. It will look to you like fading, bleaching, embrittlement, yellowing, weakening, and breaking. And light damage is both cumulative and irreversible. So you cannot put something that has experienced light damage in the dark and let it come back to rest. It will not rest. What you can do is put something in the dark for a little while to extend the amount of time you can display something safely. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But I want to show you this picture. I'm going to use the laser function. Hopefully not blind myself. This way? Nope. This way? I'm blinding myself. There.
There you go.
This picture. What is this weird triangle? This is a picture of a crazy quilt made out of silk. And the silk has been on display for so long that it's completely fallen apart. It's not just faded or bleached or become brittle. It's completely shattered. That's what it's called. It's called shattering. Silk has this special, it's not special, it's terrible. It's a terrible mechanism called shattering, where when it's exposed to light for too long, the molecules themselves will actually explode. And that is what's happened here. Silk is so delicate and it does not like to be exposed to light for very long. It's very, very sensitive souls. There's nothing that you can do after that. It's just gone. The silk is just gone. And other things are also sensitive to light. They will lose their colors. They won't shatter like that, but there's still nothing you can do after something is faded. It's just faded forever. So that's why it's really important to be really, really diligent about how much you have put things on display. It's obviously really nice to have things on display because the reason we have things is to look at them and to share them with people. But we don't want to ruin them in the process of doing that. There's a balance. So how can we successfully manage that balancing act? Well, there's a couple of things we can do. The first is let's switch our light bulbs to LEDs from whatever else they were. LED light bulbs are great because they emit visible light and no UV light. Visible light is the light that we need to see. UV light is a component of light that we don't see at all, but causes a lot of damage to our things. So there's no purpose to it for us, and it harms things, so let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of UV. We want to also keep things that are on display in our homes away from direct sunlight. So keep them away from where windows are shining in on things. Look for sunbeams in your house and where you have things framed, and make sure that there's no window light shining on those things. Sunlight is extremely bright. I mean, it changes based on what today was not very bright. But in the summer, it can be very bright. It's full of UV. It's really, really damaging to our things. So if you have something on an internal wall, like this wall here, there's no windows shining on this wall. They still get lots of light, but they don't have any of that sunlight. So we can still see them, but they're not getting daylight. Another trick that I really like to tell people is to display copies of things rather than the originals. When it comes to documents and even photos, most of the time you can't tell the difference between an original or a copy. You can put the copy in a nice, safe place in storage labeled where you know exactly where it is, somewhere really secure and safe, and then display the copy of it, and you can enjoy the copy forever on display and never worry about how much light it's getting. It can be full sun if you want it to be. It can be in your bathroom. It can be in your attic. I don't care. And the original will stay in perfect condition. Well, it will stay in good condition, and the copy you can enjoy. I like to tell people to store things in the dark in boxes. Boxes are the best place, archival boxes are the best place to store things. And to limit the amount of times things are on display. So when I say that light damage is cumulative, you can use that to your advantage. So think about like something like the quilt, which is difficult to make a copy of. Can't make a copy of your great grandma's quilt. You still want to have it on display. So this is the kind of math that I like to encourage people to do. You could have your great grandma's quilt on display for a year in your house, or you could take your great grandma's quilt out on display for the month of December and have it there when all of your family gatherings are out. Put it in a nice, safe closet for the rest of the year. You could do that for 12 years and it would have the same amount of damage as just 1 year if you have it out on display for the entire year. So you can stretch it out like that, and that is the kind of like protection that you're giving it by just being like a little bit thoughtful about how you approach the preservation of those items. All right, incorrect relative humidity. This is damage caused by high, low, or fluctuating humidity. It can look like mold growth, splitting, cracking, corrosion, rust, or warping of items. And sources can be the climate. In Minnesota, sometimes we have humidity that goes up and down in weird ways. It can be really humid one day, it can be really dry. It can be from heating and cooling a building, so you probably know that in the winter it gets really dry inside. And it can be from water intrusion or condensation on like an external wall or a window, something like that. Humidity is a big problem for our collections because a lot of the things that we own are sensitive to moisture in the air. Things that are made from like natural materials like wood or paper and photographs and stuff, they absorb water in the air when it's really, really humid, and they release moisture in the air when it's dry. They pay attention to the humidity in the atmosphere and they respond to it like that. And so when it's really humid and they are full of water, they sort of expand, and then when they release that water, they sort of contract. And that can cause these like shape deformation processes. And that is a problem you might understand when you see these pictures that are curling like that, is because the image layer on the top of the photograph is absorbing and releasing water at a different rate than the paper on the back of the photograph. And so they're causing the photographs to curl. And it also affects wooden items, where you see sometimes furniture is cracking, is because wood expands and contracts in different directions at different rates. And so when we have furniture that's constructed and pieced together in different orientations, it will crack when it's experiencing lots of different relative humidity fluctuations. And then I have a picture of rust and a picture of mold. These are all things that can happen due to humidity. Humidity, well, it start growing, I usually say around 70% humidity, which is not very high if you think about it. It's like, it can get 70% humidity in the summer really easily. In the winter, not a problem, but in the summer, you guys probably aren't even thinking about 70% humidity right now. You're probably thinking that sounds nice. Anyway, avoiding storage in attics and basements is great because, again, these places are the places where we have more uncontrolled environments. They're more likely to be really humid in the summer, and in the winter, really, really weird environments. I like to tell people again to use display cases and frames and storage boxes to buffer shifts in humidity because they can prevent really rapid changes. If you have a storage box, it's going to, if it's made out of like archival cardboard, it's going to absorb and release humidity itself. And so that will slow down any changes inside of the box itself. It's kind of neat. The recommended conditions for museums, I have a great big caveat here. The recommended conditions in a museum setting, ideally, are 40 to 60% with a maximum daily fluctuation of 5%. This isn't even realistic for most museums. This is extremely specific. This is not the kind of conditions that you're going to get inside of a house. I'm just telling you this number so that you can get an idea of like what museums are striving for. But I'm also sharing this number with you because I wanted to give you the idea that the things that our collections and our objects like are also the conditions that humans like. We also like our humidity to be around 40 to 60%. We don't like it when it's 30% humidity and really dry and our hands get all cracked. And we don't like it when it's 80% humidity and we're like sweaty. That's the same for our objects. And that's why I really like to tell people to keep their things in the main living space of their homes, because we're more likely to try to keep our homes at that same humidity level as well. It works out really well that way. Incorrect temperature will cause things to melt or yellow, become sticky, and plastics will deteriorate more rapidly. Low temperatures will make things more brittle and prone to break, but other than that, actually things like to be cooled, usually. Fluctuating temperatures will cause the same problems as the fluctuating relative humidity. What to do about it? Avoid storing things in attics and basements, because again, that's where we have the most uncontrolled environment. Avoid storage or display in direct sunlight or above radiators, because you are more likely to get hot spots in those places. Again, also avoid storing things in in kitchens. Sometimes I see people like put things like right above their like kitchen cooktop or right above their dishwasher or something like that. That can be like weird environment in those places. I want to tell people to digitize their sensitive film formats, especially if you have something that you really want to keep forever that's on a VHS tape. A lot of people have home videos and things like that on VHS tapes. VHS tapes are not considered very stable, not stable at all, actually. They are rapidly falling apart. The only way to preserve them is to keep them in a cold storeroom, like a freezer or a fridge right now. Your best solution is to digitize those onto another form of media. And there are companies that do that for you, or you can do it yourself. If you look online, there are steps to do it yourself, but you can also just hire someone if that's more your speed, or get like a friend to help you. But yeah, I want to warn people that there isn't a way to preserve your VHS tapes really, and there's not really a good reason to, because why spend a lot of resources trying to preserve a VHS tape when you don't even have, most people don't even have VCRs anymore. So try to get on top of that sooner rather than later so you don't lose all of your home videos. The recommended conditions for temperature to preserve things are 59 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, that's basic human comfort levels as well. Like you're storing things in your main living space, things are going to be in the right temperature for preservation. Thieves and vandals. This could be loss or damage that might be physical damage, graffiti, that sort of thing. It's either premeditated, it could be a crime of opportunity, and it could look different depending on what you have and based on a risk assessment. This one's harder to talk about based on a home situation because it really depends on what you have. I don't know if anybody has a really high valuable item or if they're living in a high risk situation for theft or damage of this type. But different things that you can do about it are to know what you have, undertake an inventory. if you have like a really high valuable baseball card collection, have a list of what baseball cards you have and where they are in your home. That would be really valuable for you. Especially think about insurance claims in the future. What if you have like a flood and you want to claim the value of your baseball card collection? It's going to be really hard if you don't have a complete list of what baseball cards you have. So that's really important, just to have an inventory of what you have. Another step that you can take is to identify possible risks, how they could be mitigated. So if you have a really dark yard and you have a piece of outdoor art that you really want to protect, the first step that you might take is maybe you want to install a security light that turns on if somebody walks past it at night. That could be like the deterrent that works best for your situation. So again, it really depends on what you have and this specific situation that you're in. So thieves and vandals is another agent of deterioration, but it's harder to talk about. Security measures could be display cases, security cameras, and limited key access. Make sure that not everybody has keys to your home. All right.
Hey, Megan, can I ask you a quick question? Do you mind going back to the Dorothy slide and maybe talking about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, who knows the Dorothy story? All right. Well, the Dorothy ruby slippers, an original pair from the movie, were on display at the Judy Garland Museum, and they were stolen in 2005. They were in a plexiglass case, and as you can see from the little sign that my colleague took when they were recently at the Judy Garland Museum, they were stolen. The plexiglass case was smashed, and the shoes were stolen within 45 seconds. Before the police arrived, I don't actually know them. But it was just very recently in the news that the culprit was pled guilty to stealing the shoes, and actually, do you know what happened?
I don't know the final verdict.
No, well, he pled guilty. Gibson, do you want to say that?
And the shoes were returned to the private individual who had loaned them
To the museum. Yeah. So the museum had them on loan, and they're not going to get them back.
Because they did not take appropriate anti-theft.
Yeah. It's very sad for the museum to have such a cool thing on display and then to not get them back. But sometimes you just don't know what to expect also.
Thank you for going back to that. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, so it's very important to be prepared for risks. Okay, so I'm gonna talk to you about pollutants. This is getting a little bit more up in the air here, so I'm gonna explain what pollutants can mean and why they can cause damage. So pollutants can mean damage caused by gases and fine particles in the air. And so when I say fine particles in the air, I mean like dust. Dust is considered a pollutant. And when I say gases, it can really mean like things that are in the air through pollution, like ozone or like sulfur dioxide from cars and stuff like that. Or it can mean the types of pollutants that come out of non-archival storage materials that we use to store or display things. So in I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I don't know the best way to do this. Okay. The best way to do this is to show you the pictures on the slide, I think. The picture here is a picture I took of my grandfather's coin collection that I was going through and doing an inventory of, so that we knew all of the coins that he had. This coin is a penny, and he had stored it in this nice little PVC sleeve, which is a sleeve that was sold specifically to coin collectors as a nice, safe way to store your coins. And this is now green. Our penny is supposed to be green. No, pennies are not supposed to be green. This penny was probably not green when you put it in the coin holder. The reason why it's green is because as PVC ages, it releases like hydrochloric acid. And the acid is making the copper in penny corrode, and copper corrosion is green. So this special coin holder is specifically damaging the coin. And that's why we have to be really careful about the kinds of materials that we're using to store our collections. And this picture here is an example from the Canadian Conservation Institute that I really liked. It's from a wooden frame that was used for this paper item. And you can see how this wood knot on the back of the frame has left this brown stain on the paper. Wood is also like a really big source of pollutants, and they are volatile organic acids. That's what we call them. And they will also cause like staining and embrittlement of paper, and that makes it like brown and kind of gross looking. Wood knots are like particularly thick areas where like a lot of these gases can come out, and so that's why it's really dark in that one spot. So it's a really good picture where you can see that. So pollutant damage will cause corrosion and tarnish, staining, dusty and dirty deposits. Dust looks bad. We don't like the look of dust, but dust also like attracts moisture and water to it. It like absorbs it kind of, and so then you can get like rusty spots where the dust has been settled. And it will cause chemical breakdown of some materials. So common sources of pollutants include car exhaust, ozone from pollution, and indoor furnishings like wood and particle board, and non-archival storage materials like PVC. So particle board is really bad because it also releases formaldehyde, which is really bad for a lot of things. I want to give a caveat for wood furniture. Wood furniture is not great for storage and display of things, but it's not always bad. Old wood furniture that we have has aged a long time, and it's probably not releasing any more pollutants anymore. If you have like an old piece of furniture that you've had for a long time and you're using it to display things, or you have books on it or something, you probably don't need to throw it in the dumpster. It's probably fine. If you're looking at new pieces of furniture for displaying things, I would recommend being cautious about buying something that's wood, and definitely avoid particle board. And instead look for something that's inert and safe, such as we like metal. We really like glass. Glass is like a really beautiful, safe material for storage and display. Well, especially for display.
File cabinets or
File cabinets are okay. Yeah, I would say that's an okay space to store things. So I want to give like a special caution for when you're looking at plastics to store things in. So like my first bullet point here is use archivally safe storage and display materials. There are a lot of things out there that say they're archival materials, and some of them are easy to tell, like metal and glass are nice, safe options for you. Particle board is bad, easy to remember. There you look for like paper and cardboard that say they're archival quality. That's better than using like acidic brown cardboard. We don't like acidic brown cardboard. When it comes to plastics, it's really tricky because places often use catchwords like archival to sell you things without actually meaning anything at all. So you have to know exactly what you're buying. And I'm going to share resources for you on like finding out more information about how to buy archival materials. They can be expensive, but it's good to buy things from reputable companies because you can't find things from like general sellers as well, but unless you know exactly what kind of plastic you're buying, which you can, I can tell you what kinds of plastic to buy. I'm not gonna tell you right now because they'll go in one year and out the other. Like I have seen a website sell archival plastic photo sleeves that were selling PVC sleeves. They were using the word archival, but they meant they were selling that kind of plastic and not actually safe archival plastics. So I just want people to be really cautious about the word archival because they don't always, people are not always using it in good faith. Okay. So another thing to do to protect against pollutants is to use air filters in your home with a high filtration rate to keep like hard exhaust and other kinds of pollutants out of your home. To do regular housekeeping to keep dust levels down and to avoid particle board furniture in particular for storage and display. And if you're buying new furniture, like if you're buying it specifically to display things, go for something that's like metal and glass rather than something that's wood.
I have a question about that. So you're saying, you know, if I have this big wood display case, does it make a difference whether it's standing up or laying down on the wood? I mean, is it just, you know what I mean? If I have a picture in a frame, in a wood thing versus a book laying on it, I would think the book is gonna get more damage than the picture frame of the wall, right?
The picture frame is probably also more safe because it's in a frame.
Right.
Yeah. If you have things that are on a bookshelf, on a wooden bookshelf, and you're concerned about them, you can also lay something in between the wood and the item to put like a little barrier layer in between them. So there's kinds of clear plastics that you can use as a barrier, for example, that you wouldn't really see, but would provide a good barrier for that those organic acids, vapors. Okay. So this is the last agent of deterioration. We've gone through all of them. This is the last one. And then after this, we're gonna go to resources and the questions. I know there's been a lot. Okay, dissociation, the weirdest one. Dissociation means the loss of information or the loss of the object itself. Can mean misplacing something, losing its paperwork, forgetting why it's valuable, accidental disposal, happens to everyone, digital formats becoming obsolete. And that's a really big one that I'm going to talk to you about. The larger your collection, the more difficult it is to keep track of things. So in museums, dissociation is really, really important because museums are keeping track of like thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of things. And it's really important not to lose things. In a home, you might not think dissociation is that important, but actually it is really important to keep track of things because I don't know about you, but my mom is always giving me things from my grandma. I think it was my great grandma's. She doesn't even know. I don't even know. Now I have all of these things, and I'm like, I think they belong to someone important, but I'll keep them. But I don't really know. It would be really nice if I knew exactly whose they were and why they're important and that sort of information. And if we were a little bit better at this sort of information tracking, it would be a lot better for us. So what we can do about it, label collections and storage. So if you have like a nice filing cabinet situation to keep track of your photos or paperwork and stuff and you're labeling things, that's really nice. Keep an inventory of your valuables. I've said that one before, but it is really important to keep track of what you have and to know what you have. To organize your paperwork in one place. I have a few pieces of art that have certificates of authenticity, and I have those certificates in the same place so that I know where they are. They're not just floating around. This one I've gotten advice to share this information a couple of times, but to record the stories of your family heirlooms so you remember why they're important to you and your family. That is really, really important advice. And my other piece of advice here is to not throw things out after they have been digitized. So this is something I want to talk about is digital formats. Is when we make a digital format of something, we digitize a photo or something, those digital formats are really great for sharing, but they're really, really hard to preserve. It's a lot easier to preserve a physical photograph than it is to preserve a JPEG of a photograph. Digital formats change all the time. You probably don't have those floppy disks that you were using. That wasn't really that long ago, but we don't use those anymore. Things are constantly evolving and changing, and in order to keep things in digital formats, you have to constantly evolve with those times. You have to have preservation copies and use copies, and you have to have 3 different versions saved in 3 different places. And there are rules for digital preservation, which are like very strict, and you have to be very on top of things in order to keep up with these systems to make sure that we don't lose things digitally. Or else you get this little Microsoft Excel, this file is corrupt and cannot be opened. Digital preservation is hard. And so I really recommend that if you're digitizing things, keep your originals and you save those, and you can use the digitized photos for sharing with people, but don't rely on those for long-term preservation. Wow. Okay, so here are my recommendations for additional resources. If you have something that's really important, really complex, and needs special care and treatment, you can find a conservator. These are some places where you can find a conservator to actually fix things for you, which is something that conservators do. The first email is actually my email address where I'll just give you advice. I don't fix things for you, but I will give you advice and help you find a conservator if you need that. The Preservation Specialist directory is a directory at MNHS's website. And then this is Find a Conservator is the National Organization for Conservators in the United States. Finding archival supplies is really important. So I have this one website that I've created. It has a really long email address, email URL. I'm really sorry about that. But you can also just Google MNHS finding archival supplies for preservation, and you'll find it that way. And then I have here 3 different places where you can search for archival supplies that are really reputable. Again, you can find archival supplies in different places. These aren't the only 3. There are lots of places you can find them, but these are just 3 examples that I think are like trustworthy. If you have an emergency that is really stressful and you want some help, these are 3 places you can go for resources. First are the National Heritage Responders, who I talked to you a little bit about. They're a national group that include a bunch of people specifically trained in giving advice and responding to emergencies that affect cultural heritage. The second is a Minnesota-based group called the Alliance for Heritage Response. That's just Minnesotans who are gathering together to do training and networking about responding to emergencies that affect cultural heritage. So if that's something that you're interested in or passionate about, you can find more there. And there's also some resources on that website. And then on the MNHS website, again here, there is some more resources on how to respond to emergencies and how to salvage things that are wet. If you have a problem with pests, there's only one website you need, and it's right there. This is the #1 resource for anything related to bugs, mice, whatever that are affecting your things. It has every piece of information that you need. Generally trustworthy sources of information. They have so much good information on these websites. If you're interested in any of the things that I talked about today and you just want to learn more, you can peruse these websites and they will give you all sorts of good information that you might just find super interesting. So I definitely recommend them. And this is the end of my presentation. I will now take questions, and that again those are my 2 email addresses that you should reach me at. One is easier than the other.
We have a question from Katie on the chat here. She wants to know about using glass that helps to block light on your framed pictures, if that's recommended or not.
Block light.
Yeah, like UV glass type of thing.
Okay. Yeah, so I definitely recommend using anything that will prevent UV from reaching your stuff. UV blockers are great. You can apply UV film to your windows at your house. You can get UV special, there's a special word that I'm forgetting.
It's like screens or
Yeah,
yeah.
special something for your framed art, and those are good because again, UV does nothing to help us and it only hurts us. UV is also bad for us. It hurts our skin, so we don't want to. So, yeah.
I don't have enough room in my house without the attic in the basement.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's not ideal, but you know, you have the underneath of your bed, you have,
Dust bunnies.
yeah, well, at least the
Yeah,
dust bunnies,
I'll-
but some nice
I'll
little
really
boxes.
need room for that one.
Exactly. Yeah, creative places to store things where, it's better than, accidental damage from. If you have to use your attic in your basement, just come up with solutions that will make sure that those places are safe for your things, like make sure that everything is up off the floor in case there's a flood. And make sure that, like, maybe your most important things are in your living spaces, and what you have in the basement are just like things that are a little bit more durable, like your china or something like that.
Dehumidifier.
Yeah, and a dehumidifier, definitely one of those.
I have a host of questions related to my situation, which is we cleaned out a farm that had been in the family for 100 years. And we found canceled checks from the 1919 and later. We want to preserve all of that and eventually study the economic history of the farm. So it was in the rafters of the garage, it was in the basement, it was in the attic, it was a farmhouse, so there is no end of mouse shit everywhere. And so the questions I have are around, how do I make that stuff safe again?
Mhm.
How do I triage it? Is a plastic tote better than a cardboard box for now? Is like, what are those steps that we should be thinking about for stabilizing and then ultimately preserving?
Great questions. Okay, so the the first question about the mouse poop, I definitely don't want to give out medical advice because I'm not a doctor, but from my understanding of hantavirus in particular is it doesn't have a very long lifespan. So if you're looking at old mouse poop, it's probably fine. And if you're worried about new mouse poop, UV light is actually good.
Yeah.
It's fine. When we were in Arizona, we used to lay out our Tyvek suits in the sun to deactivate the hantavirus. So if you're seeing a lot of mouse poop, you might want to lay things outside to make them.
I mean, I
safe
kind of
again.
sequestered it, so it's been in isolation for a year or two.
That's probably enough to
Okay.
make it safe to clean. And then just like do it outside somewhere where you have good ventilation, to make sure you're not breathing anything in. And this is a good question. I've had questions before about whether to keep things in a plastic bin or a cardboard box or stuff. I think that it's okay to keep things in plastic bins. I love when people can put things in archival boxes, but archival boxes are expensive, and it's a lot less expensive to put things in plastic bins. Plastic bins have other positives in that they're great at repelling water in case you have water damage. They have negatives in that if you put things inside a plastic bin on a day where it's kind of humid, then things can stew in their humidity and things can get moldy, and we don't like that. So you might want to poke some holes in your plastic bins on the sides to make sure that there's some like air movement. And another thing to make sure of is to make sure you're buying a plastic bin that's made out of polypropylene or polyethylene. So it's like a nice stable plastic that's gonna last for a long time. You might want to make sure they're clear so you can see what's happening inside and not something that's like black or opaque so that you have no idea if there's like little gremlins inside doing damage. And another thing to make sure of is to make sure you don't buy really gigantic ones and then fill them to the top and make sure you're buying small ones and filling them reasonably so that you can actually move them around.
Thank you.
Yes.
Piggybacking on that, what about the use of little desiccant packs inside a plastic container like that? That recommended or not?
It really
Desiccant packs?
does. It depends on what the things are inside of the bins. So for some materials, like, for example, in archaeological,
Could you repeat the question so they could
Oh,
hear it
yeah.
on Zoom? Yeah, thank you.
the question here was, should we put desiccant packs inside of a plastic bin when we're storing things? And my answer is that it depends on the kind of material. In an archaeological collection, there are some materials that need to be kept bone dry in order to preserve them. Archaeological iron, for example, will start to rust if it's not kept at like 10% humidity. It's really, really sensitive to humidity. So for those materials, we'll keep them at a really, really, really low humidity and storage forever. And then there are other kinds of desiccant packs which you can buy, which will keep a moderate environment. There's like special silica gel packs that are specifically designed to keep things at a moderate 50% humidity inside of the container that it's in. And then when it's run out, it will change color and you can condition it to be right at the same condition again. So those are like sort of available methods that you can use, but you don't need to use those methods. And I would caution you against just willy-nilly throwing in like desiccant packs and silica gel, because you don't want to completely zap all of the humidity out of a container and like throw a container that's at a perfectly good humidity and like make it 10% humidity for no reason, because that will harm the things that are in it instead of helping them. So unless you're like monitoring the environment and regularly checking on them or things like that, just like normal precautions, like making sure that there's some form of ventilation and stuff like that should be enough.
Good question.
So I have about 7 or 8 photo albums from the 70s and 80s that my mother put photos in, and they're the old ones where you had that peel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't get the photos out of there.
Yeah, they're stuck for good.
Hey, and if you try to peel them, they, yeah,
They're
you
stuck,
can't come out because there's holes on the backside, and it's like, what can you do with them? Just leave them there?
Yeah. I was actually just talking about this yesterday with my colleague at the Minnesota Historical Society, the objects conservator. And so these are called magnetic photo albums, the ones that you can't take the photos out of again. And I once, when I was much younger and more naive, tried to take the photos out of one of those photo albums with a piece of tooth floss. And it was so bad for the photos. They made them curl, and the paper just like ripped, and it was devastating. It was terrible. This was before I was a conservator. The only thing that you can do, and this might actually work, is to just leave them for a really long time until that magnetic adhesive completely dries up.
Well, it's been 50 years. I've no longer
If you peel the plastic up,
I'll just take the plastic off.
take the plastic off, and let that adhesive have exposure to the air. I think that
Oh.
is more likely to help.
So maybe my kids might be able to.
Yeah. Peel the plastic off and let the adhesive dry for a while and see if, but just let the photos try to fall off naturally, and it might take another 10 years. I don't know. It's not gonna happen quickly, but you can't get them off.
No,
You can't try to force them off. It's just not gonna work. Yeah. So those albums are the bane of our existence. And that's one of these things, is that sometimes we think we're doing things to preserve our stuff, and we're actually doing like the worst possible thing that we could be doing. And we have to be really cautious about doing those things now. Like, what do we think we're doing to preserve something right now that's actually is gonna cause a lot of harm in the future.
So on that topic, once the photos are out of the album, then what? And is it different for black and white versus color? Is it different for black and white versus early color versus later color? Like, what are we supposed to do is it okay to just stick them in a box next to each other, or what's the right way to preserve them?
Great question. The way that photographs are typically stored nowadays in a museum is that they're placed in individual photo sleeves and then placed in a box, upright in a box, not like horizontal, like sandwiched on top of each other or anything. But and the photo sleeves can be made of a couple different kinds of materials. They can be made of an archival plastic, really important that it's an archival plastic, or they can be made of an archival paper, an archival paper envelope. I personally really prefer paper because I just trust paper a lot more than plastic. But plastic has a lot of benefits in that you can handle the photos and look at the photos without taking them out of the plastic. So there are benefits to both, which I will admit that people really prefer the plastic paper.
What about labeling?
Labeling, you can label the sleeve rather than the photo itself. This is the best way to do it. If you really want to label the photo itself, you can write on the back with a really dull pencil so that you don't have any pointy implements making an impression on the other side. But the best way to do it is to write on the sleeve instead.
I like paper better too.
But you can't see them.
Right.
What do you recommend is the best way to preserve newspapers?
Ooh, newspaper, that's a
Yeah.
good question. How to preserve newspaper? The best way to preserve newspaper, it depends. Are you trying to preserve an entire newspaper or a clipping? Okay, so if you have a clipping from a newspaper, then you can put it in an acid-free folder, and keep it in like a supported folder like that, and that's how you can preserve it. And the folder can also go in a box.
One at a time, or can you have multiples in the same folder?
You can have multiples in the same folder. You can also have them individually in individual folders. Folders aren't that expensive. And the nice thing about a folder is that you can, like the folder itself provides support for each clipping, and then you can label each folder with what the clipping is so that you know which clipping you want to look at the time. So-and-so's obituary. Gibson has her hand raised.
Would you tape it in there? Would you use tape at all?
No, definitely don't use any tape.
How about that magnetic backing? Too soon.
No, no magnetic
Well, contact paper, yes, no?
contact paper. Like what's contact paper?
Contact, well, I have old newspaper articles and I put them on contact paper so that they don't get brittle.
It's like typewriter paper.
Yeah, but they make it clear.
It's clear.
The sticky is adhesive, right?
Yeah.
Oh. So
I guess that's a no. But then I'm like, well,
So, basically I'm gonna tell people to steer clear of anything that has an adhesive on it because, most adhesives or sticky things are, we don't know what they are and they don't have a very long lifespan. So if you have seen anything that has tape on it from like 10, 15 years ago, it's like bright yellow and super brittle. That is like a nightmare to try to remove from old archival documents and old photos and old maps and things. And it is just when people are developing tape and contact paper and stuff like this, they're thinking of like immediate use. They're not thinking of long-term use. There are some adhesives and things that are developed specifically for long-term use, and those are the things that conservators use and do a lot of research on and think really hard about whether or not they should be used in this context or that context. But most of the things that are on the market are not used in that context. They're not thought to be used in that context. And so over the course of time, they become like they age, they become permanent, they become really hard to remove. and they will cause, like staining and permanent damage to the things. Yes, and they're very acidic and they become very brittle and then they'll break the things. And newspaper itself is really tricky to preserve because newspaper is one of these things that's only meant to last for like a day. So we're really like raising the clock to preserve newspaper. Old newspaper is so brittle that like touching it the wrong way, it will snap. So that's why it's so useful to have them in these like sort of stiff folders instead of just like loosey-goosey, because that provides that extra support so we can keep them long term. Because otherwise newspapers are just like, they don't want to exist anymore. They're like, I've served my life, like let me go. And we're like, no, we want to keep you. Yeah.
Would you store them horizontally or lay them flat?
I would lay newspaper clippings flat. Yeah. They
Yep.
have more support that way.
Joellen would like to know, if when you talk about the folders, are you thinking manila file folders or a different?
Yeah, you can
Source.
get like a manila style file folder, but you can get an archival specific type of
Acid free?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Acid free. Exactly.
You mentioned briefly, digitizing stuff for storage. Is there somewhere I could look for more detailed information how to digitize and store the digitized materials?
Yes, I'm gonna send you to the preservation specialists directory. So this is, I sent you to this link to look for conservators, but there's also on the preservation specialist directory, actually all sorts of different types of professions who do preservation type work. So if you're also looking for a historical architect to preserve your historical home, you can find someone on the preservation specialist directory. If you're looking for someone to digitize your family photographs, you can find someone on the preservation specialist directory. It's a good jumping off point at least. And if you have trouble using the directory and you need some advice, you're not finding the kind of person you're looking for, you can reach out to my email address and I'll send you some more advice.
I mentioned this stuff that we're looking through. In homes in the early 1900s, it was all pencil. And pencil seems to not like friction very much. How can I preserve these things that were maybe not on high quality paper, also written in pencil? What are the considerations I should have for that?
Yeah, well, a nice thing about pencil is that it's actually not very light sensitive because it's written in like graphite, which is a mineral. The minerals are not going to like fade the same way that an ink is going to fade, which is based on like a plant essentially, which will get a dye. So the main considerations for preserving like a pencil written drawing, pencil on a piece of paper is just preserving the piece of paper, and preserving the piece of paper is as simple as like following the 10 agents of deterioration in terms of storing it in a box somewhere in a stable environment, in like a folder in the dark, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
I'm not having that experience, but okay.
What kinds of experience are you
It's they seem to with the friction, it seems to be rubbing off. Because the paper wasn't high quality either, right? So it might be similar to the newspaper question. These weren't pieces of paper that were intended to live forever.
You could separate them, that might help too.
Maybe there's thousands of them.
There are like special kinds of like really smooth tissue paper that you can use to like interleave in between pieces of paper. That might provide like the kind of buffer that you need to prevent that kind of rubbing. That might help.
Yep.
Especially when you're dealing with such massive quantities of materials.
We've got the original rubber bands as well.
Ooh, lovely. But those are the ones.
They're in great shape.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a chemist for Georgie's.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And, when they were developing color film, 1929-30, Grandpa would bring film cameras home and say, Grandma, shoot it up, we need to know how this is. So we've got these canisters of film. Well, one, really afraid to open them because we know how freaking unstable they could be, like, full unstable. Can I go to one of those conservators and say, yo,
How do I?
how do I?
How do I
And I
open
will
this?
drive them to you very carefully.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
That's
How to open film canisters without it blowing
That's
up.
great.
Yeah.
Scary.
I've got some old, like really old, undeveloped film that looks like it's been shot already.
okay, cool.
But I looked online and really not able to find anywhere where you can get it. without-
Images of the past downtown. I've been bringing my stuff to him for years.
Talked to him and said that,
Mark said no.
he said he can't do the ones, ours are too old. And that they're,
What?
and he recommended a place and they've gone out of business.
There's a place in White Bear Lake. Is that the one he mentioned? Or
No, it was, somewhere in Colorado. or something.
I'll see if I can find the White Bear one.
Where's it?
Downtown on top of Main
So I
Street.
thought-
Which
Between
one's out?
Main, it's similar,
Thank you.
between Main Street and Second. Yeah.
I brought all my things.
So sorry, the question. Yeah, do you mind repeating that? Yeah,
Okay.
it is the past, yeah.
Like specialist, like photographs, historic photograph places that, like might be interested in having the chance to look at those materials, so.
I'm sorry, who would do that? Cause I've got a whole mess of.
Let me look into it, I'll give you my business cards, because I, like, those are very interesting, and I think that there are places that would be very interested in looking at them. Yeah, I'll have to think about it a little bit though.
I'm sort of like her. I have 5 great aunts, 2 sets of grandparents. All of their stuff is in my garage and trying to be really careful with it and. But I know that there's photographs that, well, unfortunately I moved to here, that the Rochester, New York Historical Society would probably like.
Yeah.
Do I like put it in another box and mail it to them?
That's probably not the right move,
They might know how to handle it too, since they're dealing with the Eastman stuff.
Yeah.
yeah, like there's a George Eastman Museum, specifically as well.
On East Avenue.
Yeah, like so this is a really good question, and I don't know, maybe even you wanna talk about it a little bit, like what's the process for donating to a museum? And this is, I sent you back right here, this is with dissociation comes really important. When you know the story about, and like the what of what you have, it makes it so much easier to donate things to a museum and makes it way more likely that the museum is going to accept those items. So when museums have collections, they often have like a lot of things in their collection that they're taking care of, and everything that they add to their collection is adding to the cost of running that museum and the burden of caring for everything that they're caring for. I don't know a better way to say that, but they're nonprofits. They're working really hard to pay for all of the space and the environment and all of these things that come with running a museum. And they often have like lots of duplicates of things, and they're trying not to add more duplicates of things. So I know a lot of museums have a lot of the same sorts of things multiple times. And so if you want to donate your things to a museum, it's really important to think of a few things. The first is, which museum am I donating it to? Is it the right museum for this stuff? Am I donating it to a museum that is telling the right story for these things? Another thing to think about is, do I know the full story of this thing, and can I attach the story of this thing with the donation so that it makes it a really compelling donation? So if you have, I'm just gonna give like a random example. If you have a random typewriter and you try to give it to a museum because it's old, they're gonna be like, I'm not particularly interested because we have 16 typewriters already. But if you give them a typewriter and you're like, this was Thomas Edison's typewriter, and I have all of the documentation to prove it, they're
That's the
gonna be
key.
like, whoa, I definitely want this typewriter. This is so cool. So, and it doesn't have to be Thomas Edison. This is just an example. If you have a typewriter with like a full story of how it was connected to your town and your grandfather and all of the information about how important it was and special, and you have all of the like photographs of maybe your grandfather using the typewriter, things like this, it makes it a lot more of a compelling donation. And so that's why it's really important to have like the inventory of what you have and the stories of why they're important and this sort of information when you donate things to make sure that it makes it more compelling. I just wanted, if you had anything to add about.
You nailed it.
So it's definitely good. Museums love when you donate things to them because that's how they have all of these cool things to share. But when you donate things, you have to make sure you're giving them all of the information that you have also so that they can share the coolest information also.
With respect to this association, this is probably going on in 1,000 other places, but Justin Brink with the Forest Lake Historic Association has been publishing on his Facebook page pictures and saying to the group, okay, who knows this person or what was, you've seen Justin stuff.
He was on the Zoom earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had to sign off, but
And it has been amazing that there's somebody out there that knew that person and they knew when that photograph was taken and they knew all the other folks on the team or at that bus stop or whatever. And that's it. It's one of the few things that I can think of that's great about social media.
Oh, yeah.
Couple of questions. You talked about wood. Is
Yes.
so we live in Minnesota. There is no way we're going to be able to control it. Should you oil wood? Should you not oil wood? Like what is the best way to keep wood artifacts in good shape?
Is this an indoor or an outdoor?
Indoor.
wood? Okay. Is this like a wood furniture that's in constant use, or is it like a wood furniture that you're trying to
Kind of both. Like I've got the library tables from the New Richmond Library, for example, or a rocking horse that was made by, great grandpa and stuff. Rocking chairs that are in the same boat.
Yeah. This is a complicated question because in a museum environment where we're not using things anymore, like the obvious answer is like we're not going to add things to them anymore because the addition of things it's not adding use value, it's just going to add to the degradation of those items. But in a home environment, like often we're using things still, and when we're using items, we have to balance the what do we need to continue using this safely with using it safely and effectively, and what do we want to safely preserve it with. And there are pros and cons. Like if you have a wooden rocking horse and you don't have any babies that are using the rocking horse, then don't oil it. It can just look there and look pretty. But if you have a table,
Will it prevent cracking though, I guess is what I'm asking.
no, the oil will not prevent cracking. The only thing that will prevent cracking is monitoring the environment. Yeah. But if you have a table, for example, that you want to use as a table still, and you want to add oil to it to make it a usable table, then I would say that you should do so without fearing that you're ruining your table, because it's more important to use it than it is for it to just go out in the garage and fall apart. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, you didn't mention garages are great, because you didn't say that.
That's where we keep all our stuff, is in the garage.
Yeah. Garages are fine.
depends on the garage.
But not the basement or the attic.
Right.
I have a question about this slide, when you says, don't throw things out that have been digitized. So my mother took all the pictures, my dad took all the 8 and Super 8 film.
Ooh, yeah.
And I have brought hundreds of films down and had them put on DVDs.
Okay.
Cause I don't want these boxes of film
Mhm.
all over my house.
Mhm.
Okay, so I have these boxes of film, now I have them all on DVDs according to Easter, Christmas, birthdays, blah, 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 blah. But you're saying don't throw out the film? I mean,
I don't even have a DVD player anymore.
I watch them on my computer.
I know, but the point is, will your
Well,
whoever's
that's
gonna
what you're
hear next-
saying, because it becomes obsolete, so here I'm thinking I'm preserving this film on a DVD. What should I be doing thinking further along than a DVD?
This is complicated because for film is not particularly stable either.
No,
So the don't throw things out after they've been digitized applies specifically to photographs because photographs
okay,
photographs are quite stable the way that they are. There are like a few things you can do to like stabilize a photograph and put it in a box and keep it. And then it's like pretty easy to take care of. But film, most types of historic film are quite unstable. Acetate films and nitrate films are both bad. There's like some kinds of film that are okay, but like most of them are really iffy. And it's really hard to find any sort of player for like most films now also.
I've scoured a lot of Goodwills trying to find projectors that I watch this film so that I knew it was on.
Yeah, so once you, if you're dealing with this kind of situation, you're sort of in it for the long haul. You have to, like, you have all of your DVDs now. DVDs are also not gonna last forever. So you're gonna eventually have to like change all of the formats from DVDs.
We don't know, do we? To what?
MP4.
Yeah, to MP4s that you keep on like an external hard drive. And then once we get rid of MP4s, it'll be a different format and you're just gonna have to keep track.
Everything
Or-
will eventually be in the cloud, so. Be all up there somewhere.
Yeah, well, actually, so there's I should have this written down for myself, but there are rules for digital preservation, which are that you should have 3 copies of everything digital. If anybody else knows this, it can help me. 3 rules for everything that you have that's digital, 2 copies. 2 should be on physical discs, and 1 should be on the cloud. The 2 that are on physical discs should be in different places. So if you have like 2 separate hard drives full of like your family photos, you should have 1 that's in your house and like 1 that's in your car or like at your brother's house or something. So that if you have, so that if there's a fire in your house or something, then you still have another copy of all your family photos. And the reason that we don't rely solely on the cloud is that even though iCloud has never gone down before, there are other examples of clouds that people have relied on to store all of their photos that have just disappeared one day.
My son's wedding pictures from last year disappeared off the internet
Yeah,
after the photographer didn't pay their magic. They just,
yeah.
Are removable drives safe to use, or are they too unstable?
Yeah, you can use a removable hard drive.
Like
You mean a thumb drive?
You can use a thumb drive. Yep, that counts. That counts as a
Solid
removable
state,
drive.
not mechanical.
Yeah, I actually don't know the difference.
It's an important distinction.
Okay.
It doesn't have birds.
If you
Okay.
hear it whirring when you're listening to it, that is not a solid state drive.
Oh, okay, that's good to
And
know.
stick shift can get you.
So if you can hear it whirring, don't use it.
It's easy to remember.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Megan?
What about restoration? Is it something on here? One of these sites to go to for restoration?
This is a great question. Thank you. Restoration. So, I've been speaking to you, in this presentation specifically about something that I call preventive conservation, which is, an aspect of, conservation, which is just focused on preventing damage from happening in the first place. And it's the most important type of, conservation that you could do because preventing damage from happening in the first place will save you a lot of grief in the future. When you come to like having to fix things later on, you don't have to fix your problem, then it's whew, that's a lot easier than having to fix things, right? So preventive conservation is like the #1 task that everybody needs to be working on, and museums are working on all the time to preserve things. Another type of conservation is restoration, which is a type of conservation which is a very specific aesthetic choice to restore something to a previous appearance. It's not the only kind of conservation treatment that someone can do. So when you take something to a conservator to get a treatment done to repair it, you can have a conservation treatment that will like do a very basic stabilization to make it so that it's not broken or like not continually getting damaged anymore. Or you could do like a basic aesthetic treatment to make it look a little bit better. Or you could do like a full restoration treatment where it looks like significantly different than it does. So there's like a lot of terminology is basically what I'm trying to say. Restoration is like a term in conservation. If you go to a conservator, it's like through the preservation specialist directory, or find a conservator, and you bring an item to them and you want them to treat it and to like do a repair, they'll talk you through different options for what kind of repair they could do. And you can tell them a little bit about what you envision the treatment to look like. If you really want something to look like really, really like bright and shiny and new again, they can tell you what they could do to make it look like that. And they might tell you about any ethical qualms they have about doing that. But often you would be able to find like a good, reasonable solution that you would both agree on. So yeah, finding a conservator would be the right pathway for that. So I hope that I did not over answer that question.
Megan, thank you very, 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 very much.
Yes.
Yeah.